Hello and welcome back to the channel. This has been a very exciting week in British politics, but I don't intend to talk about any of that in this video. Instead, I want to focus on one specific thing, and this is something I have heard said a fair few times recently, and it really annoys me every time I hear it. This is the phrase, "It is the will of the people." So I want to talk about that in this video, and I want to explain my thoughts around it. Now, this is a negotiation channel, so I'm sure some people might be asking, what has that got to do with negotiation? And there is a negotiation theme, which I will come on to. Of course, linked in with some political ideas, shall we say. So for anyone new to this channel, this is the Collaborative Negotiator. I'm a professional negotiator with over 10 years of experience, and I like to talk about a variety of themes. In particular, I like to shape how people think about issues, because crucial to any negotiation is the ability to critically analyze any particular argument. So today's particular argument, which people may have heard in all sorts of occasions, all sorts of scenarios, phrases, all sorts of different politicians, it is the will of the people. Now first, what is the will of the people? Let's break this down a little bit. You will hear it used in the context of granting somebody a democratic mandate. So, for example, a political party or individual may have won an election. So they will claim that this gives them a mandate. What, of course, they will conveniently not bother to mention is the fact that quite often in those elections they won with less than 50% of the vote. So needless to say, less than 50% possibly is stretching the definition of the will of the people a little bit. But that is democracy, and democracy is a flawed system. Everybody knows that. Of course, that is because it is better than all the other extremely flawed systems. But what it doesn't mean is that by winning an election and a so-called mandate, that you are allowed to do anything that you want. Because people vote for political parties or groups for a whole host of reasons. Not necessarily everyone is in agreement on one particular issue. Therefore, it is quite common for any political leader to decide to take a stand on a particular issue that actually goes very much against the desire of the people that voted for that political leader. This happens all the time. So there is no way, or almost no scenario, where anyone can claim that the will of the people grants them a full democratic mandate to do anything that they like. Democracy does not work that way. The second point I would like to make about the will of the people is that it is not as difficult as you might think to manipulate a large group of people into believing your version of events. If that sort of thing was not successful, then why would political parties spend millions of dollars or pounds with companies, with influencing organisations, whatever they may be, in order to persuade the electorate of the legitimacy of their argument or their manifesto, whatever point they wish to make? They spend that money with those organisations because those organisations are dedicated toward figuring out what makes people tick. And there's a whole host of dart techniques that can be used here. And some of these can be applied in negotiation settings. I mean, obviously, if you're negotiating with a large group of people, then you're acting in a political sense and you would use some of these persuasion techniques. So an example of that is that politicians will quite often phrase their arguments in emotive terms, rather than applying facts and logic. This is because people respond more strongly to emotion than they do to calm, logical, facts or statistics. Statistics turn people right off. Of course, if you're going to make an important decision that's going to influence the course of your country, then you should be applying facts, statistics, and whatever other boring bit of information. But that is not how people work. And that is one of the important things to understand whether you are a politician or a negotiator, that quite often how you phrase things is even more important than what it is you're trying to say. So when it comes to the will of the people, well, quite frankly, the will of the people can be manipulated if you know how to do it, and if you have enough money and enough people to help you to do it. And if, for example, shall we say, there is a scenario where a political leader, not looking at any recent examples of course, has won a so-called democratic mandate by essentially lying to the people of the consequences of their policy, well, is that truly the will of the people, or have they just been manipulated into voting for a lie? I leave you with that question. The third point, and this is the one I particularly want to focus on perhaps in this video more than anything else, is that quite often politicians will use the phrase the will of the people in order to shut down debate or challenges. So when a politician says, that is a nonsensical argument because it is not the will of the people, essentially what they're trying to do is say to the other person, your views are not important, the will of the people have spoken, and therefore I have decided that we shall not discuss this any further, or I do not welcome your challenge, shall we say. And that is quite often the context in which politicians will use this phrase. So perhaps let's do a little brief tour on what is democracy. And there's some, it's obviously not a complete guide, but there's three absolutely critical components for any successful democracy. The first one is voting, of course, and everyone thinks of this. You vote for somebody to represent you and to make your views known. Now there's all sorts of ways of making your opinion known, and voting is just one of many means by which the electorate at large can let people know what they think as a group. And of course, elections are important. Voting for people to represent your views is important. But a common mistake that many people make is they think that is where their democratic duty ends. And it is not. It is only one of many things that any democratic citizen should do if they feel strongly about any particular issue. So this leads me nicely to the second point, which is that democracy is also all about participating in civil society. And this is quite a broad concept, and academics will debate this quite extensively. But to keep it simple, living in a democracy is not just about voting. Perhaps you can become a member of a political party. Perhaps you can fill out surveys or polls so that leaders can get an understanding of your views. Perhaps you can write a letter to your MP, or you can join campaigning groups and so on. These are all means of participating in civil society in a way that helps to shape democracy. So that is something that people need to understand, that it doesn't just stop at the voting booth. There's a lot more that they can do. And when people decide that it is not worth it, because they don't believe in politics, they don't believe in the political leadership, then what that means is that an increasingly narrow range in which political leaders can claim legitimacy. And believe me, they will claim legitimacy. So for those who, shall we say, want to win power but don't feel like putting the hard graft into being too democratic about it, lack of voter engagement in civil society works for those types of political leaders. And this is one of the biggest criticisms of the UK political system, in that it very much narrows down the ability of any large group of people to successfully influence democratic institutions and the way UK democracy should work. It becomes a very narrow range, and only an increasingly small and smaller numbers of people can influence British politics rather than the vast majority, because they are not engaged. And then we come to the third point. This is a really crucial one that I really want to stress in the context of this discussion about the will of the people. Democracy is all about campaigning for change through non-violent means. In the old-fashioned days, if a country wanted to change something, usually they went to war about it. Usually there's a big old riot, big fight, armies, lots of bloodshed. So generally undesirable, you might say. One of the crucial aspects to any successful democracy is that people can campaign for things that they think are not right and need changing. And what is absolutely crucial for any functioning democracy is to have those routes open to people. Because this is the problem, this is when things go wrong. Take any country that you wish to name, any democratic country. Think of all the problems they might have, maybe with terrorism, maybe with disenfranchised young people, disenfranchised ethnic minorities. They are all disenfranchised because they have no viable means of expressing themselves and campaigning for change. And as a consequence of that lack of ability to engage properly, they will turn to other means. Now, I'm not including protests as a violent mean. Protest is a very much non-violent mean. Obviously, I know they can turn violent, but let's ignore that for now. But that is a viable means of expressing yourself, engaging civil society, and campaigning on a particular issue you feel strongly about. And this is why everybody in the UK should be extremely concerned by the current government, or maybe even former government's point, take whichever way you want to look at it. They're the way that they try to shut down the ability of people to have protests. I may not agree with whatever it is anyone is protesting about or campaigning for, but I most certainly do believe that they should have the right to campaign on that particular issue through non-violent means. And by denying them that right, you give them less desirable routes by which to express themselves. So turning back to the phrase, the will of the people, what do you think would happen if the will of the people always prevailed? If, there's always a democratic election and that was it, everyone just completely lawfully abided by that decision with no dissent, no desire to campaign for change. Well, we'll look at a little bit of some examples in British history. And I'll start with a really obvious one. Slavery would still be legal. Slavery became illegal in Britain and the British Empire because a group of people really, really strongly campaigned against it. They were not popular. They went up against wealthy vested interests, but they still kept at it because they believed that their cause was morally right. And needless to say, slavery very much remained illegal across the world. Well, not entirely across the world perhaps, but the vast majority of it. That is because those people didn't accept the will of the people that slavery was okay. What about women who campaigned to vote, not just in the UK, but in various countries? Some of their campaigns were perhaps a little bit extreme. They perhaps took protest to extremely disruptive levels. But they did so because they did not want to accept the status quo that women should not have the vote. They campaigned for change. They did not have a viable democratic means of campaigning. Therefore, they had to use other means. I'll also talk about being gay in the UK. That was actually a criminal offence, I believe, until the 60s. It was decriminalised because the UK population had decided it was unfair to have it that, and there's various things wrong with that particular law. And the discrimination against gay people was rife. And it still exists. That particular campaign is not over as far as the gay or the LGBT community, or community as it now exists, still campaigns to change people's minds. And let's take transgender, the current political topic of the day in the UK. Whatever people's views on transgender, it should absolutely be the democratic right of people to campaign on transgender right, or even also against it. And when there is a majority view, then change can be effected. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's usually things that take a considerable period of time. But when looking at gay rights in the UK as one example, you can see that there has been a huge amount of change across many years, decades even, because people did not accept the popular will that being gay was wrong. And now, generally speaking, in UK society, gay is accepted. It's normal even. That is because of all that change. There's also a funny little example here that many years ago in the UK, if somebody was convicted of stealing a watch above a certain value, then the legal system of the UK would actually condemn that individual to death by hanging. So what started to happen was that juries would convict those people of theft, but because, for example, they had stolen items like the watch because they were starving and they were trying to find money to buy food to feed their families, the juries refused to give them the death penalty. And what they did, a very amusing quirk of British justice history, is that they then made all those items, for example the watches, below the value that would qualify for a death penalty. So by doing that, they actually affected a change in the law, because juries simply refused to give people death penalty sentences for what they considered to be lesser crimes. This is another way in which you can change the will of the people and the way that the UK system works, whether democratically or in terms of the justice system. And of course, I talk about a more topical current debate class, which is back in the 50s and 60s in Great Britain, and perhaps the case still in various countries around the world, it was permissible to be racially abusive. Some people still do feel it is acceptable to be racially abusive to ethnic minorities. But this is no longer accepted as the norm, as normal or accepted behaviour. And again, this is because over a period of many years, decent people campaigned hard to change not only the law, but people's attitudes towards racism. So what are the final remarks I wish to make about this, the will of the people? Well, if you ever hear any democratically elected politician ever use that phrase, you should mock them. You should call them out, because this is quite frankly one of the most undemocratic things that a politician can say. They should know, as politicians themselves, that democracy is all about trying to effect change, and that does not mean you have to accept the will of the people. You should also understand that democracy is very much strongly about not accepting the will. Democracy does not work if people do not accept, when people don't, just accept the will of the people without question. Democracy fails at that particular point. The strength of democracy is that it permits challenge. And if you deny challenge, then you will never improve. And this is very much the same when you're preparing for any kind of negotiation. And this is a mistake I see people make in negotiation context. People don't understand how to welcome or manage challenge. If you want to be a successful negotiator, it is not about bluffing your way, bargaining successfully, or being, a gregarious person that can talk the other side to your point of view. Having a strong position that you can successfully argue against the other side, it's all about having tested that position with your own side, having invited challenge, and having taken on what people have told you in order to improve your negotiation position and how you're going to carry out that negotiation. So, like negotiation, accepting the concept of the will of the people is a path towards failure. And the final point I would like to make in this video is that for better or for worse, any large group of people, as well as individuals, can be manipulated. That can be made to think in a certain way. Now, of course, there's always exceptions. There are always individuals that will not accept the status quo will use critical analysis skills and will argue again, even the best of arguments, even the most absolutely logical, sensible, common sense argument in existence, there will be someone who will oppose it. That is the nature of these things. So the secret to politics, as well as to the negotiation, is understanding this, understanding how you can find ways of persuading people. I'm trying to avoid using the word manipulating here, but that can also apply. And there's very much some dark arts in this in the negotiation side, as there are in politics. And I'll probably talk about that in a different video, and I've talked about it in past videos. For now, in the context of this debate, understand that the will of the people can be shaped. For someone with a very attractive message, lots of money, and lots of minions to work on their behalf, they can persuade an awful lot of people to do an awful lot of strange or harmful things, as well as good things. It is all about the context. So I hope you found this video helpful. I hope that people will always challenge whenever you hear the phrase the will of the people, because it really gets my goat. And I look forward to suitable challenge in the comments to this video below.